cupcakes. Welcome to another Self-Love September video. This time I'm going to be talking about empathic ability, highly sensitive people, and one of the reasons for that is because I know that so many people that watch my channel identify as empaths or identify as highly sensitive, and even if they don't necessarily identify within those parameters, they don't use those terms, they do think of themselves as being highly susceptible to other people's energies, other people's emotions, the vibe in a room. You know, they're just picking up on things all of the time, and they feel as though they are often drained by that or exhausted by that, or even if they don't feel particularly negative about it, they do recognize that it is very much a distinct part of their reality and they may grapple with it at times. So this video is for those amongst you who do identify as empaths, do identify as highly sensitive, and experience some of the issues that come along with that and some of the phenomena, if you like, that come along with that. So essentially, you're going to be a person who feels that they actually take on the emotions of others, can experience the emotions of others, or you're going to be somebody who's just highly sensitive to other people's emotions, other people's needs, maybe other people's fears. And again, when you walk into a room, you might feel like you're taking on quite a lot. So for anybody underneath that umbrella, this particular video is going to be for you. So the first thing that I want to ask you to do in order to bring self-love to this aspect of your life is to think about what you are telling yourself about these abilities. What are you telling yourself about the fact that this is a part of your reality? And the reason I'm asking you to place your focus there, first of all, is because I do think that a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the narratives around being empathic and being highly sensitive are based primarily on disempowering language and disempowering ideas. So the idea, for example, that if you're an empath, you are practically weakened as you walk around in the world. It is like a living nightmare for you. You know, you're constantly just bombarded with emotional information that is not yours, that you do not need, that you do not wish to process. And yet there you are going through it, there you are encountering it. For people who experience that they are highly sensitive and they go through the world in that way, a lot of the narrative around that, a lot of the dialogue around that, again, is about how it's disempowering, it's stressful, it's distracting, it's a nightmare. Let's face it, there are a lot of resources that tell you that it is a disempowering thing, it is a difficult thing, it is a negative thing, it is an unfortunate thing, it is something that you need to really sort of power through because there is so much about it that is difficult and uncomfortable. Okay, there are some parts of it that are no doubt difficult and uncomfortable, but do we really need to place the focus so much onto that narrative? And are there any harmful effects of doing so? I think there are harmful effects. I think that often we can also look at these things as being superpowers. We can look at these things as being excellent for our spiritual development and excellent for our creative potential and our creative projects. We can think of these things as being great ways to empathize with others and to be able to understand what we can do to better our reality and to bring more power and more positivity to a situation through having a better handle on what is going on within that situation. And I think a lot of people who identify as empathic or highly sensitive in a way are potentially overlooking that because of the resources that they are imbibing and the narratives that go on around those things and how a lot of the negative parts of it are highlighted whilst the more positive aspects of it, or even just the more interesting aspects of it, the more neutral aspects of it, are not covered quite so much. So ask yourself, have you been sort of developing a narrative around these abilities or this phenomena that you're witnessing within yourself that is disempowering, that is negative? Is that a self-loving way of approaching being highly sensitive or being empathic? Perhaps not. And like I said, even if you don't fall into these categories, even if you don't use these terms, I think there's something definitely to be said for asking yourself if you are sort of stuck in a toxic narrative about it, telling yourself that it's only something that causes you difficulty, it's only something that creates unpleasantness, and really you're just firefighting with it all the time. You're trying to find ways to cope with it rather than actually seeing how you can switch it to your advantage, how it can be actually quite a positive thing if you want it to be, and how it's possible to have a fairly good handle on it and utilize it when you see fit to utilize it, rather than feeling like you're constantly burdened with it all of the time. If you find that you are somebody that's invested with these kinds of qualities, that you have these kinds of abilities, I would recommend just start thinking about how this could be positive. How could it be a conversation starter, for example? How could it be something that helps you to bond with people more or get closer to people more? How could it be something that really encourages you to forge forward with your spiritual practices and your spiritual journey, particularly because you must need to, or you most likely feel as though you need to ground and you need to center, you need to shield before you go out and hobnob with people out in the world. So that's one way in which it can really enhance your spiritual journey, because you're always looking for these different ways to be able to enhance it as a power rather than allowing it to affect your day in a negative way. Think about the different ways that you can utilize it to make a difference in the world. Think about how it has a positive effect on your character, and it might have a positive effect on your point of view. Maybe it makes you less judgmental. Maybe it makes you better able to understand what a situation requires when you are in the midst of it. I'm definitely not trying to say that there aren't some difficulties that you have to grapple with, but obviously what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take away for a while from the overexposure that I think empaths and highly sensitive people may have to that narrative, and kind of put them on to something that is more positive, more empowering, or as I said, even just more neutral. So take some time to think about how this is helpful, how it is in life enlivening and enlightening, how it can create positivity for you in your life, in your family, in your friendship group, in your community, etc. Just because you might be capable of experiencing people's emotions at times, whether it's frequently, whether it's only certain people, whether it's only some of the time, just because you might be capable of that, or you might be capable of being very susceptible to energies and very susceptible to vibes amongst people, etc., it doesn't mean that you have to be a pushover. It doesn't mean that you have to be a weakling who can't handle situations and needs to be constantly removed from situations because you find that you can't handle it. I think that's often something that you put on yourself without really questioning whether or not it has to be your reality. In other words, is it true? Is it genuinely true that that is what you have to deal with, that you have to run away from situations, you can't cope with things, maybe you can't get into certain discussions, or you can't be around large groups of people, you can't go to events, whatever it is that you're telling yourself that you can't do, that's not going to be possible for you, really think again, because I think a lot of those narratives can be unself-loving, and I think they're also not supported by a great deal of evidence. If you really look at the timeline of your life, the challenges that you've managed to overcome, the things that you've managed to do, and the content of your character, the core of your character, and all of the different qualities in your nature, I think very often once you sort of examined all of that, you see that, like, okay, I'm really putting myself in a disempowered position here, where I'm telling myself that I can't do these things, or I can't be these things, or these things are really hard for me. But are they? Is this just something that I've picked up from reading certain resources or talking to certain people online who claim that that is their reality? And does it have to be my reality? As soon as you start to say to yourself, I can use this superpower in order to detect where changes might need to be made, or in order to read a room and respond accordingly, or I can use it in crisis situations, or whatever the case may be, I think you start to really just put your best foot forward, and you start to take the helm with your own capabilities, and you start to think of them as capabilities rather than just as things that you're burdened with, things that you can't escape from. And again, I really want to reiterate, I really want to stress, I'm not trying to say that it's always easy. I'm not trying to say that you won't need breaks, that you won't need time to decompress. All of those things are true, but they're certainly not the entirety of the situation. And I would love to hear in the comments down below, actually, from anybody who previously used to feel that they were in a disempowered state as the result of being empathic or being highly sensitive or something along those lines. But actually what they've come to realize over the course of time is that there is a lot of empowerment in it, and there are ways to be able to control the experiences and get them to work to your advantage, rather than finding that they're keeping you on the back foot. Because I do feel like there must be people that watch my channel specifically who have found that over time they've really managed to take this experience from being a weakness or a burden to being a superpower, and to being something that can be utilized when necessary to great benefit for themselves and for others. So let's hear from those people. I would love to know if we have any of those people amongst my audience. A very self-loving thing to do if you are empathic or highly sensitive is to take responsibility for what drains you and for what energizes you. You must acknowledge that amongst lots of other different variables, being highly sensitive, being empathic, being something of that nature is obviously draining. It can have the potential to be very draining. So first of all, you need to recognize what other things in your life tend to drain you. What kinds of things do you think you could reduce or eliminate entirely that tend to be drains on you? If you feel like being highly sensitive, being exposed to all kinds of information from others or just from the energy in a room is something that is a part of your nature, it's something that you can't necessarily escape, then you have to accept that it is going to potentially be a drain at times. And so it's up to you to figure out, okay, well, what else tends to drain me or disempower me that I could reduce or cut back on? What could I eliminate that tends to make me experience disempowerment? Because I think if you're also giving yourself to things that are disempowering you or demeaning or belittling you or making you feel drained, or making you feel resentful that you've spent your time or your energy in that way, then in a way you don't really have so much just cause to complain about how being empathic is a drain on you or being highly sensitive is stressing you out, because actually you're not giving yourself the best possible possibility to use it as a superpower. You're engaging in things that are draining and disempowering you across the board. You're not really thinking about how you can conserve energy and how you can therefore make your abilities work for you rather than against you. So what's draining you? What is disempowering you? What doesn't feel good for you that you can reduce or eliminate? And that will give you back some vital energy store to then be capable of dealing with these things that you experience in terms of being able to take on other people's energies or emotions or whatever the case may be for you. Arm yourself with the knowledge of what drains you, and also arm yourself with the knowledge of what tends to empower you, what tends to fuel you, what tends to give you the best possible opportunity to have a really good day where you feel like you've got a lot of energy, you don't feel fatigued. Again, this is the kind of thing that you kind of have to be responsible for on your own journey. If you identify that you are highly sensitive, you're empathic, then give yourself the best possible opportunity to start every day on the right foot. Feel that you are starting with a full tank. Feel that you are on the side of empowerment and you're erring towards inspiration and feeling fueled and feeling strong, rather than letting all of these influences in that are draining you, that are not good for you, that are disempowering. I mean, it is about personal responsibility. It's about personal responsibility, whatever the weather, whatever happens, whatever you're doing with your life. But it's particularly true that if you identify these kinds of abilities within yourself, then it stands to reason that you've got to be more responsible about the way that you spend your energy. So take some time to think about what disempowers you and what you keep sort of putting your energy into that's draining you and giving you really no return on that investment. And then also think what empowers, what inspires, what makes you feel stronger. How can you get more of that into your regular routine? When it comes to shielding and protecting before you go into society or before you go on social media or before you get into a conversation with whoever, that's really a matter of personal choice. Lots and lots of people ask me and have asked me over the course of time, how do you shield? How do you protect yourself? How do you make sure that your energies and your vibration belongs to you and all the other shit belongs to everybody else? And to me, I just feel like there's different ways of doing it. You do have to go and do a little bit of research. It is a little bit of trial and error. There are different things that you can do that work for different people. So many people like to visualize white light, sort of surrounding them in a protective bubble, whereas other people really can't stand that whole thing and they think it's not going to work for them, or they've tried it and it didn't work for them at all. Some people really love words of power. I know that for me, I find words to be very shielding, very strengthening. I feel like it changes me. Some words that I say before I leave the home change me at a cellular level, it feels like, for me. So that's really a strong thing for me. And also using consecrated incense and stepping through the incense as I use words of power, very strong for me. For other people, it's crystal talismans, it's sacred jewelry, empowered jewelry. There's so many different ways. Please do not ask somebody for a one-size-fits-all measure of what it is to shield and protect, because everybody has their own thing, everybody has their own way. You can find that you can combine different things that you've read about online or in books, or that you've been had suggested to you by other witchy and woo-woo people, and you will find that a combination of things works for you. You may find that you need to completely customize, but believe me, if you are identified as empathic or highly sensitive, or you're listening to this video thinking, okay, that's me, ding, 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 then there is a lot to be said for having some kind of shielding or protecting device, some kind of system that you have for, at the very least, whenever you go into high stress situations or situations with a lot of people. You might feel that for you, you do not need to shield and protect every single day. You might feel that for you, it's just something that you pull out of the bag when you know that you're going to need it, when the situation calls for it, when you know that it will be required. For other people, it's an everyday thing, and they do tend to find that if they do not shield and protect, then it is a problem. It is something that tends to come back and bite them in the arse later on. Go on a bit of a journey, have a period of experimentation, enjoy that period of experimentation. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to find a shielding or protection system, right out of the gate. Just try things and see what works, and try to keep a record of what works and what doesn't work so well. And you will find along the way that you'll always potentially have some measure of protection and shielding as you go through and you experiment with different things. But when you hit upon the one or the two things that kind of really work for you, then you will really know about it, and you will feel like, wow, that really amped me up. That gave me a lot more power to work with. You might find with your particular experience that sometimes it's hard to figure out where you end and where somebody else begins. You may have such a handle on what it is that they're going through, or what their needs are, or what their fears are, that you find it very difficult to differentiate between you and them. And that might be a sign that your boundaries are actually weak in general when it comes to the relationships in your life. It might be a sign that you do need to disengage from other people's stuff a little bit more, recognize that you need to put more emphasis on what's going on in your life rather than potentially cheerleading or caregiving in other people's lives quite so much. If this is resonating with you, then I would really call upon you to have a little period of time where you cool off from helping other people with their stuff, listening to other people's stuff, and really give yourself an opportunity to center back onto yourself. If you know that you are an overgiver and you are constantly doing something for somebody or constantly agreeing to favors, then this would be the perfect time to kind of wind that down, dial that back a little bit so that you can put more into your own tank and see what comes from that. This might be something that's very difficult for you to do. You might be coming out in hives as I'm even suggesting it, but that might be a strong suggestion that it is the right way forward, darling. If I'm speaking directly to you on this and it's making you feel weird because you don't want to pull back on what you're giving or what you're providing or the space that you're holding, might I suggest that some of the issues you might be having with the capabilities that you have could be to do with weak boundaries, not giving yourself enough, not recognizing when it's time for you to pull back from being the person who provides or caretakes or gives of their time and energy. You know what? It doesn't have to be a straight up choice between giving everything that you've got, being very available for people, very open to people, and then the other end of the spectrum where you are not giving anything at all, you are closed, you are cold, you have booted your compassion right over the edge of a cliff and you want nothing to do with anybody anymore in that regard. Obviously, there's a massive spectrum between those two things. And it's not going to be in every situation that an empath or a highly sensitive person is going to have weak boundaries and they're going to be overgivers. So please don't think I'm talking to everybody as a collective, because I'm not. But I do think for some people it's worth thinking about how much is being given and how much is actually being reinvested into self, back into self, because sometimes there can be an imbalance there that is quite pronounced, and until it's actually sort of focused on and highlighted, it can go unnoticed. So that's one of the reasons I'm saying this. There are definitely some people who state that they are empathic or highly sensitive, who are not overgiving whatsoever, and they don't have an issue like that. And in fact, sometimes quite the opposite. They are closed down, they are closed up and unwilling to connect or to hold any space or give anything of themselves. And sometimes that's partly because of their capabilities. So I'm certainly not saying this is for everybody, but some people that are watching this may need to have this particular piece of advice about overgiving, and it's very common. So where are the boundaries weak? Where are you saying yes to too many things that are being asked of you that you really do not want to give potentially, or you do not have the time, the energy, the money, the focus? Where can you start to be more honest about that, and do so without apology? Just because you cannot answer to everybody's call and do everything for everyone doesn't mean you're a bad person. And sometimes it's one of the key ways to get that empathic ability, that extra sensitivity into your control and start making it work for you. Do not use your abilities as an excuse not to take action, as an excuse not to get out there in the world, as an excuse not to deal with your own bullshit. Don't use your abilities as an excuse not to connect with community. All of those things can be a really bad shout. Now, obviously, you're going to find your own ways of dealing with your own capabilities. You're going to find sometimes that there are things that trigger you, there are things that make it worse, and you do need to stay away from those things. But as you're thinking about those things that you might need to reduce or step away from entirely, I would also recommend that you just really put it through the filter of self-honesty. Make sure that you are not using your capabilities, your experiences in the world as an excuse to step away from things that scare you, as an excuse not to really connect with your own potential and your own power to make change. because I think a lot of people could be doing so much. They could be instigating change on so many levels: social, professional, environmental, etc. But they are feeling that they're held back by these capabilities that they have, that, as I said at the beginning of the video, they're viewing as weaknesses. And I do think that there is some self-sabotage in that, and there is some excuse making that goes on with that. So we do need to be clear with ourselves about when that might be happening. Only you can say when that is happening. Somebody else in your life might have an opinion on it, but honestly, only you can sign off on that opinion and whether or not it has validity. So that's why I'm really asking you to make a strong attempt to get into your own psyche and figure out whether or not there is any excuse making going on with you. Don't use your abilities as an excuse to delay, as an excuse to give up, as an excuse to play the small game. And certainly don't use your abilities as an excuse to let other people bully or demean you. Don't look back in the rearview mirror at something that's happened to you and say, well, of course that happened to me because I have these abilities, and so I was able to be ground down and kind of held underfoot, and that's why I'm a victim, and that's why these things happen to me. Instead, decide that you're going to take hold of the fact that this is a part of your reality, that these abilities are a part of what you have to work with in this lifetime, and you're not going to allow yourself to be told what's what or to be bullied or demeaned. It starts with you making the clear decision that that's what's going to happen, and it starts with you taking your powers in hand and thinking of them as powers, and describing them as such can be a very potent part of taking things in the right direction. It can definitely be helpful to talk to other empaths, talk to other highly sensitive people, get some support, get some empathy, and really sort of exchange ideas as well about what works, particularly in terms of shielding and protection and all that kind of good stuff. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and as I've tried to kind of bring you back to throughout, definitely recognize when there are parts of the narrative that are not helpful, that are fairly common to see within this kind of dialogue, that make you feel as though you're in this really difficult, really disempowered state where there's nothing that you can do, and that you really have no choice in the matter, and it's all doom and gloom, and it's all weakness, and it's all burden. As soon as you start to realize that you're picking up on that narrative and it's kind of going into you, ask yourself, is that useful? Is it true? And is there anything else that I can be focusing on instead that's more empowering and more useful? Darlings, I really hope that this video resource was helpful. Thank you so much for giving it the time. Again, I would love to know anything and everything you have to say in the comments down below. And let's especially hear from people who feel as though their abilities are bringing them into a state of power, because I think other people might really need to know that that is possible for them. So much love and self-love. Blessed be.
In the woods, under dust.